A smartphone app to track the spread of COVID-19 may never be released, ministers admitted yesterday, as they abandoned a 3-month attempt to create their own version of the technology. Now, I watched Matt Hancock yesterday. He's looking even more haunted than usual, isn't he? And oddly enough, he looked quite haunted at the beginning, as if he almost had a fear or a suspicion of what might happen to him after he sold his soul to Boris Johnson late last year. I watched the press conference yesterday and I had a bit of a moment. I'm not going to lie to you. I had a bit of a sort of double take, a Scooby-Doo, one of those little moments, because I don't remember anybody mentioning that we were actually pursuing both apps all along, and that there was a sort of attempt to set one off against the other, wasn't there? I'm pretty sure callers told us on this programme weeks ago that the app that the government was looking at wouldn't work on Apple phones. Wasn't that one of the first things, or have I imagined that? That's the problem now, is that I feel I am just dipping under the surface of having my head on right. Do you know what I mean? Just beginning, not to drown, but just beginning to struggle to swim. I like, as you do as well, because you choose to listen to this programme, I like to know what's going on. I don't like comforting lies or empty slogans. They don't work on me. There are times, particularly with Brexit looming, that I really wish I did. I wish I could find comfort in things that are simply not true, but which spare me the strain of having to think about them. But with this app, I think for the first time this morning, I found myself almost waving the white flag. The complications, the confusions, the contradictions, the misdirections, the misinformation, the outright lies, the deceits, the deceptions, just now are reaching a point of critical mass where I find myself thinking, and I'm about to ask you to help me get back on the straight and narrow, to mix my metaphors quite violently. I find myself thinking now that, oh, for heaven's sake, I just can't keep up anymore. I thought we needed an app before we could properly loosen the lockdown. I thought we needed a really top-class testing and tracing system before we could even contemplate reopening shops. And as far as I can tell, we haven't got one. And the last person I'd trust to tell me that we have got one is the person who's currently in charge of trying to reassure the country that we're safe. Am I making sense to you when I say, I'm using the swimming analogy? The swimming analogy works quite well for me. It's only 10 minutes past 10. I reserve the right to change it completely by 11 o'clock. But I've been swimming quite happily. I've been, even tried a bit of butterfly, bit of backstroke, bit of breaststroke over there. It's the PPE, got my head around the PPE. That was all nonsense. The reason why we didn't do the testing was because we didn't have the kit. The reason why we didn't have the PPE was because we hadn't done the preparedness. The reason why we didn't have the equipment was because we hadn't got the stockpile. The reason why we didn't have a strategy was because Boris Johnson shut down the committee dedicated to pandemic response within days of becoming Prime Minister. The reason why we didn't have any leadership was because he went on holiday in February. Do you see what I mean? I can swim around. I've got it. Touch that base there, swim down, inflate my pyjamas, swim to the other side, dive underneath the water, get the leather brick, bring it back up again, pop it on the side, green badge, yellow badge, red badge, blue badge. I've been doing great. I've had my head around everything. And then today, looking at this story about the app, I just feel myself throwing my hands up in frustration and saying, I don't even know what day it is anymore.
So Matt Hancock was actually asked when the app would finally be released. And he couldn't answer it. He said, we're working towards the final release of this app. He also talked about having a plan. So surely the app would be part of the plan, but it's not. So what is the point in having a plan if a certain part that would be important in dealing with this pandemic is not part of the plan? And when you are actually asked about it, his response is, we're working towards a date for the release of this app. The problem with this app was that it was developed without the technical assistance of Apple. Then it was released as a test on the Isle of Wight on Apple products, but only worked on 4% of Apple products. So this means it was a complete and utter failure. Then what happened? The government actually went back to Apple and said, Apple, can you help us out? Instead of actually going to Apple at the beginning and saying, we need an app, can you work with us to develop one, or can you develop one for us and we will give you the money for it? But they didn't do that. Now, why did they not do that? My feeling is that there was some corruption involved, that there was a Tory donor who decided to set up a company to develop an app, or a Tory donor who already had a company set up already, and they asked the government for a contract to develop an app. But the deeper problem here is that the government is telling a story on Monday that's forgotten on Tuesday, and then telling a story on Tuesday that's forgotten on Wednesday. Now, the stories are forgotten within the noise and confusion of the story on the following day. Now, the government isn't even using half-truths. They use confusion. Now, James O'Brien is confused, so that means that I'm definitely confused. It seems to be that Dominic Cummings has a master plan here, Operation Chaos, seed confusion to avoid scrutiny. Now, Boris Johnson's government sold the idea of an app as something after the lockdown, but it should be the opposite. The app should be developed before the lockdown and work in unison with the lockdown, in tandem with the lockdown, in order to track new infections and to deal with them. But instead, what Matt Hancock is doing is he's releasing an app now, or allegedly now, because it's still not clear when this app will actually be released. But the idea is that we release the app after the end of the lockdown and then track and trace new infections. What is the sense of that? It still doesn't make any sense to me, in the same way that the quarantine doesn't make any sense to me. The idea of introducing a quarantine after the number of new cases has declined, not at the beginning of the lockdown. Anyway, once again, I'm confused, James O'Brien is confused, and I assume you're confused also. And of course, because you are confused, it makes it much more difficult for you to follow any rules that Boris Johnson or Matt Hancock attempt to put into place. Let me know in the comments, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server where we share news, chat, and have some fun? If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.